So here's the million-dollar question that probably pops into your head every time you think about what to eat. Are carbohydrates your trusty sidekick for powering through your day, or are they secretly plotting against your waistline and energy levels?
Yeah, it really feels like the debate around carbs never settles, does it?
Exactly. One minute we're told they're essential fuel, the next they're public enemy number one. Today, we're throwing open the case files and doing a deep dive into the truth about carbohydrates.
Right.
Our mission is to kind of cut through the confusion and understand their real role in our energy, how our bodies store them for later, and, the smart way to time our carb intake so it actually works for us.
Exactly. And we've waded through a mountain of research and articles to bring you the straight facts on carbs. No complicated jargon needed. Hopefully,
Good.
think of this as your shortcut to really understanding what's going on.
Right.
We're zeroing in on what matters most. The difference between simple and complex carbs and why it matters. How to make sense of the glycemic index and load.
Which always sounds complicated.
It can, but we'll break it down.
Yeah.
Also, the incredible benefits of fiber, which often get overlooked, and how to strategically use carbohydrates to fuel your workouts and athletic performance.
So the goal is to give the learner the knowledge to feel confident in their food choices without getting totally bogged down in the science.
That's the plan. Quick but thorough.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning then. What exactly are carbohydrates in simple terms?
Okay, think of them as one of the three main energy sources for your body. You've got carbs, fats, and proteins.
The macronutrients.
Right, the macros.
Mm.
Carbs are basically molecules made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Their main job, quick fuel.
Quick fuel. Okay.
When you eat carbs, your body breaks them down into glucose, which is just a type of sugar.
Right.
This glucose can be used right away for energy, or it gets stored. Your liver and muscles stash it away as glycogen for later use.
Ah, glycogen. That's the storage form.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, carbohydrates is a big umbrella term, It covers sugars, fruits, vegetables, fibers, legumes, lots of stuff.
Right. Okay. And we always hear about simple versus complex carbs.
Yeah.
What's the key difference there? And why should we care?
Well, the difference really boils down to their structure, and that affects how quickly your body gets the energy out of them.
Structure.
Simple carbohydrates are made up of just one or two sugar units. Think of them as easy pickings for your digestion.
So quick energy hit.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
They don't need much breaking down. Examples of single sugar units, monosaccharides, are glucose, fructose.
Fructose like in fruit.
Yep. Found in fruits, vegetables, honey.
Yeah.
And it's actually half of table sugar, which is sucrose. The other single unit is galactose.
Okay.
Then you have double sugar units, disaccharides, that's sucrose, like I said, table sugar. There's lactose, which is milk sugar.
Glucose plus galactose.
You got it. And maltose, which you get when starches break down. That's two glucose units hooked together. An interesting thing is that all these double sugars have at least one glucose molecule in them.
So they're the fast release fuel.
Yeah.
Got it. What about the complex ones then?
Complex carbohydrates are, they're like longer chains of these sugar molecules all linked together. Much bigger structures.
More complex. Makes sense.
The main ones we talk about are starches and fiber. Starches also get broken down into glucose eventually.
But slower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they're more complex, it takes your body longer to do the job. So you get a more gradual, sustained release of energy. Think of it like a slow-burning log compared to kindling.
Okay. Nice analogy.
Yeah.
And fiber.
Fiber is also complex, but it's mostly indigestible for us. That gives it a whole different set of benefits we definitely need to get into later.
Right.
But generally speaking, it's usually better to focus on complex carbohydrates for more stable energy levels through the day.
And the simple ones. Too many can be a problem.
Yeah, if you consistently eat too many simple carbs, especially more energy than your body needs right then, that extra energy can end up being stored as fat.
Okay, that makes sense. The quick burn versus the slow burn. Now, let's tackle something that always felt a bit like a secret code to me. The glycemic index, GR, and the glycemic load, GL. What are these really telling us?
Okay, GI and GL, let's demystify them. Think of the glycemic index, or GI, as basically a speed rating.
Speed rating. For what?
For how quickly the carbohydrates in a specific food make your blood sugar levels rise after you eat it. It's ranked on a scale, usually 0 to 100.
Okay.
And it compares that food to a reference, like pure glucose or sometimes white bread, which are assigned a GI of 100. So they're the benchmark for a fast rise.
So a high GI food is like a rocket for your blood sugar, sends it up quickly.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so higher number equals faster spike. Makes sense. Can you give some examples?
Sure. Foods with a GI of 70 or higher are considered high GI. Things like, well, white bread, many breakfast cereals, sugary drinks, potatoes sometimes.
Right.
Medium GI foods fall between 56 and 69. And then low GI foods, which cause a much gentler rise in blood sugar, are 55 or less.
And what kinds of foods are typically low GI?
A lot of fruits, most vegetables, beans, lentils, whole grains.
Mm.
Those tend to fall into the lower category. But here's where it gets interesting.
Oh.
The GI of a food isn't actually set in stone. It's not a fixed number for, say, all apples.
Wait, really? How can it change? What affects it?
Oh, lots of things. The type of starch in the food matters. There are different kinds, like amylose and amylopectin, and they digest differently.
Okay.
How you cook the food is a huge one. For example, pasta cooked al dente, still a bit firm, has a lower GI than if you cook it until it's really soft and mushy.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, and even cooling cooked starchy foods like potatoes or rice after cooking can increase something called resistant starch.
Resistant stuff.
Yeah, it acts more like fiber, resists digestion, and that actually lowers the GI of the food when you eat it later.
Wow. Okay. What else?
The particle size, like whole grains versus finely milled flour, the finer it's processed, generally the higher the GI.
Makes sense. Easier to digest.
Exactly. Ripeness of fruits can change the GI too. Bananas, for example, get higher GI as they ripen.
Right.
And then there's the fiber content. That's very soluble fiber, which we'll talk more about. Plus, if you eat carbs with fat or protein.
Does that slow it down?
It usually does, yeah. Fat and protein slow stomach emptying, so the glucose gets absorbed more slowly. Even the acidity of a meal can lower the GI response. And, individuals can vary too.
So just looking at the GI number on a label or a chart isn't the whole picture then. It's kind of context dependent.
Precisely. It gives you an idea,
Yeah.
but it's not the full story of what happens in your body.
Yeah.
And that's actually why we have the glycemic load, or GL.
Ah, okay. So GL gives us more context.
Yeah, think of GL as more practical, real-world measure. Because it takes into account both how quickly the food raises blood sugar, that's the GI, and how much carbohydrate is actually in a typical serving size of that food.
Okay, that sounds useful. So like watermelon has a high GI, right? But maybe the GL isn't that high.
Exactly. Watermelon is a classic example. Its GI is relatively high. But a typical serving doesn't actually contain that many grams of carbs because it's mostly water. So its glycemic load is quite low.
Ah, okay. So it considers the portion size. How do you actually figure out the GL? Is there a formula?
There is. It's pretty simple, actually. You take the food's GI, multiply it by the grams of available carbohydrate in a serving.
Available carbohydrate?
Yeah, that's just the total carbohydrate minus the grams of fiber, because fiber isn't digested and doesn't raise blood sugar.
Got it. GI times available carbs.
And then you divide the whole thing by 100.
Okay. And does GL have categories like GI does? High, medium, low?
It does. Generally, a GL of 20 or more is considered high, 11 to 19 is medium, and 10 or less is low.
So using watermelon again, high GI, but maybe low GL per serving.
Exactly. It gives you a better sense of the actual impact that eating a normal portion of that food will have on your blood sugar.
That seems much more practical for making everyday food choices.
It is. And this distinction between GI and GL is pretty important when we think about long-term health, especially things like diabetes risk.
How so?
Well, several large observational studies have found links between diets that are consistently high in both GI and GL and an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
Okay, that's significant.
Yeah. And on the flip side, some intervention studies have shown that focusing on lower GI diets can actually help improve things like fasting blood glucose, other blood sugar markers like HbA1c, and insulin sensitivity.
Especially for certain people.
It seems particularly helpful for people who already have poor blood sugar control or existing type 2 diabetes. So yeah, understanding GL can be a really valuable tool.
Okay, that clears that up quite a bit. Thanks. Now let's talk about something that I agree with you doesn't get nearly enough attention. Dietary fiber. It feels like the unsung hero of the carbohydrate world.
Absolutely. You're spot on. Fiber is definitely a nutritional powerhouse that often gets overshadowed by the focus on sugars and starches.
So what is it fundamentally? You said it's indigestible.
Right. Simply put, dietary fiber is the part of plant-based foods that our bodies can't break down and absorb. It's technically a carbohydrate, but it passes through our digestive system relatively intact.
Okay. And is all fiber the same?
No, not at all. It's important to distinguish between the fiber that naturally occurs in whole foods, fruits, veggies, grains, nuts, seeds, and isolated or synthetic fibers that are sometimes added to processed foods.
For health claims, usually.
Yeah, often to boost the fiber content on the label.
Yeah.
But the real stars are the naturally occurring ones. And we generally talk about two main types based on how they behave in water, soluble and insoluble.
Soluble and insoluble. Okay, break those down for us. What's the difference and what do they each do?
Sure. Soluble fiber is, well, soluble in water. It dissolves and forms a sort of gel-like substance in your gut,
Like an oatmeal.
exactly like an oatmeal or chia seeds when they get wet. This gel has some really cool effects. It slows down the emptying of your stomach and the absorption of sugar into your bloodstream.
So that helps prevent those big blood sugar spikes after meals.
Precisely. It blunts the glycemic response. It also plays a big role in lowering cholesterol levels.
How does it do that?
It interferes with the absorption of cholesterol and bile acids, which are made from cholesterol in the gut, helping your body get rid of them.
Interesting. Any other benefits of soluble fiber?
Yes. Because it slows digestion and adds bulk, it can help you feel fuller for longer after eating. So it's great for satiety and potentially weight management.
Makes sense.
And here's a really fascinating aspect. Soluble fiber acts as a prebiotic.
Prebiotic, meaning it feeds the good gut bacteria.
Exactly. Your beneficial gut microbes ferment soluble fiber, and this process produces short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
And those are good for us.
Very good. SCFAs provide energy for colon cells, have anti-inflammatory effects, and play roles in gut health and potentially even wider aspects of health.
Wow, okay. Soluble fiber is doing a lot. What about insoluble fiber then?
Insoluble fiber is the roughage. It doesn't dissolve in water. Its main job is really about digestive regularity.
Keeping things moving?
Yep. It adds bulk to your stool, which helps stimulate the bowel muscles, and it can also help soften stool, making it easier to pass. Think of it as the intestinal broom, kind of sweeping things through.
A cleaning crew. Okay, so preventing constipation, basically.
That's a primary benefit, yes. Helps promote regular bowel movements.
So we need both types then. They seem to have different but complementary jobs.
Absolutely. Most whole plant foods actually contain a mix of both soluble and insoluble fiber. That's why variety is key, and the benefits really add up.
What are the big picture health benefits of getting enough fiber overall?
Oh, the list is long. Better digestive health is a big one. Regularity, reduced risk of diverticular disease, hemorrhoids. There's also a potential link to lower colorectal cancer risk, though that's complex.
Okay, what else?
Better metabolic health. We talked about blood sugar control and cholesterol lowering. Fiber is also linked to better weight management and potentially a reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
And the gut microbiome support you mentioned?
Huge. Supporting a diverse and healthy gut microbiome is increasingly recognized as crucial for overall health, impacting everything from immunity to mental health. And fiber is the key food source for those beneficial microbes.
So basically, eating enough fiber is associated with reduced risk of many chronic diseases and even living longer.
That's what large population studies consistently suggest, yes. Higher fiber intake is linked to lower overall mortality. It really is a cornerstone of a healthy diet.
Okay, I'm sold on fiber. What's the magic number? How much should we actually be aiming for each day?
The general recommendation for adults, depending on age and sex, is typically somewhere in the range of 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day, maybe even a bit more.
25 to 35 grams. How does that compare to what people usually eat?
Unfortunately, the average intake in most Western countries falls well short of that. Many people might only be getting half that amount, maybe 15 grams or so.
Wow, quite a gap.
It is. So the key message is to consciously include a wide variety of fiber-rich plant foods in your diet every day.
Like what specifically? Give us some good sources.
Think fruits, especially berries, apples, pears with the skin on, vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, leafy greens, carrots, whole grains like oats, quinoa, brown rice, whole wheat bread. Legumes are fantastic sources, beans, lentils, chickpeas, and nuts and seeds too.
So lots of whole plant foods.
That's the ticket. And one important tip, if you're trying to increase your fiber intake, do it gradually.
Why gradually?
To give your digestive system time to adjust, suddenly adding a ton of fiber can lead to temporary bloating, gas, or discomfort. And crucially, drink plenty of water when you increase fiber.
Because fiber absorbs water, right,
Air-
especially soluble.
Exactly. You need enough fluid to help it do its job properly and keep things moving smoothly.
Got it. Gradual increase, lots of water, variety of plants. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about carbohydrates and exercise. I know they're often hailed as the ultimate fuel for workouts. Why is that?
Yeah, for physical activity, especially anything moderate to high intensity, carbohydrates really are the body's preferred and most efficient fuel source.
Why preferred?
Because glucose, which comes from the carbs you eat or stored glycogen, can be broken down relatively quickly by your cells to produce ATP, the energy currency muscles use to contract. Fat is also a fuel, but it takes longer to convert to usable energy.
So carbs are the high-octane fuel.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially for bursts of effort or sustained intense activity. And as we mentioned, your muscles store glucose as glycogen. These glycogen stores are absolutely critical for powering effective and repeated muscle contractions during training and sports.
So running low on glycogen is what leads to hitting the wall.
That's often a major factor, yes.
Yeah.
Depleted muscle glycogen is strongly linked to fatigue during prolonged exercise.
Okay, so for athletes or even just active people, how should they think about timing their carbohydrate intake? Let's start with endurance exercise, like running or cycling.
Timing becomes really crucial for endurance performance. Let's break it down. Pre-exercise, during, and post-exercise.
Okay, pre-exercise.
So, eating carbohydrates in the hours leading up to a long or intense workout or competition is key. The goal is to maximize your liver and muscle glycogen stores.
How much and when?
The general guideline is something like 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight, consumed maybe 1 to 4 hours beforehand. The exact amount and timing might depend on the individual and the event.
And this helps how?
It ensures your glycogen tanks are full, which can help delay fatigue. It also makes sure you have glucose circulating in your blood, ready to be used as fuel right from the start. This can definitely enhance endurance performance.
Okay. What about during exercise? Do you need carbs while you're actually running or cycling?
For longer endurance events, definitely. We're talking activities lasting, say, more than 60 to 90 minutes.
Why then?
Because your initial glycogen stores start to run low. Consuming small amounts of easily digestible carbohydrates during the event, things like sports drinks, gels, chews, maybe even some real food like bananas or energy bars, helps maintain your blood glucose levels.
And that helps spare the glycogen you still have.
Exactly. It provides an external fuel source, sparing your limited muscle glycogen, and importantly, it helps maintain liver glycogen output to prevent your blood sugar from dropping too low, which can cause fatigue and impair performance.
Makes sense. So keep trickling fuel in.
That's the idea for long events.
Okay, now post-exercise, the workout's done. What about carbs then?
This is really critical for recovery, especially if you're training frequently. After hard exercise, your muscles are primed to take up glucose and replenish those glycogen stores you just used.
So you need to refuel.
Absolutely. Consuming nutritious carbohydrate-rich foods is essential. Think potatoes, pasta, rice, other grains, fruits, vegetables. Your muscles are like sponges ready to soak up that glucose.
How quickly do you need to eat carbs after exercise? Is there a window?
There's often talk of an anabolic window. And while the timing isn't maybe as critical as once thought for single workouts, if you need rapid glycogen recovery, say you have another hard training session later the same day or early the next day, then timing's important.
So for rapid recovery.
For rapid resynthesis, the recommendation is often to consume about 0.5 to 0.6 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight, ideally higher glycemic carbs, every 30 minutes for the first 2 to 4 hours post-exercise.
Wow, quite specific.
It is, but that strategy maximizes the rate of glycogen replenishment when time is short. If you have more time, like 24 hours or more until your next hard session, the total amount of carbohydrate you consume over that period becomes more important than the precise timing right after the workout.
Okay, good to know. I've also heard athletes talk about carb loading. What's the deal with that? Is it different from just eating carbs before exercise?
Carb loading is a more intense strategic approach, specifically aimed at supercompensating or maximizing muscle and liver glycogen stores beyond normal levels, right before a major endurance competition.
So packing in even more stored fuel.
Exactly. The classic method involved depleting glycogen first, then loading, but more common methods now usually combine a period of tapering, meaning reduced training volume, with a very high daily carbohydrate intake.
How high?
Often upwards of 8 grams, maybe even 10 or 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day for, say, 3 days leading up to the event, along with rest or very light activity.
And does it work?
For endurance events lasting longer than about 90 minutes, yeah, it can significantly improve performance by providing larger fuel reserves and delaying fatigue.
Okay. Now, what about strength training? Lifting weights, resistance exercise. Is carb timing as important there?
That's a good question, and the picture seems a bit less clear-cut compared to endurance exercise.
How so?
Well, strength training relies more on short bursts of intense effort, which definitely uses glycogen, but maybe not to the same extent of depletion as a long run or bike ride, unless the workout volume is extremely high.
So the overall need might be less.
Potentially. Some research suggests that higher overall daily carbohydrate intakes might be more consistently beneficial for strength athletes engaging in high-volume training. Think lots of sets per muscle group.
But what about timing carbs right around the workout itself? Like a pre-workout carb snack?
The evidence for acute performance benefits from carb intake right before or during strength training is actually mixed. Some studies show a benefit, particularly for higher volume sessions, but many others show null effects.
No difference.
Right. Or sometimes, interestingly, studies might even show slightly better performance metrics in lower carb conditions.
Really? Why would that be?
It's not entirely clear. It could be related to other factors in the studies, like maybe the lower carb group compensated with more protein, or perhaps there are hormonal differences, or even just study limitations. It's an area still being researched.
So the jury's still out on pre-workout carbs for lifting.
It seems less consistently crucial than for endurance. And there's also evidence suggesting that as long as you're getting sufficient protein around your resistance training sessions to support muscle repair and growth, adding extra carbohydrate might not offer significant additional adaptive benefits for building muscle or strength.
Interesting. So protein might be the more critical factor for recovery and adaptation and strength training.
Protein is definitely key for muscle protein synthesis. Carbs help replenish glycogen, which is still important for fueling subsequent workouts, but their direct impact on muscle growth itself, beyond providing energy, might be less direct than protein's role, especially if calories and protein are adequate.
What about eating carbs during a strength workout? Any point to that?
Generally, for typical strength training sessions lasting an hour or maybe a bit more, it's probably not necessary for most people, unlike prolonged endurance exercise. Your muscle glycogen stores are usually sufficient.
Okay. So focus on overall daily carb intake matched to training volume and prioritize protein around workouts for strength gains.
That seems to be a reasonable summary of the correct thinking, yeah.
Just one last thing on exercise and carbs. I've heard this idea that when your muscles store glycogen, they also hold on to water. Is that true? Does carb loading make you retain water?
Ah, yes, the glycogen-water connection. There's definitely truth to that. Glycogen is stored in a hydrated state in the muscles and liver.
How much water?
The classic older research often cited a ratio of about 3 grams of water being stored, along with every 1 gram of glycogen. So yeah, when athletes carb load and significantly increase their glycogen stores, they will likely gain some body weight. That's partly due to the extra glycogen and partly due to the associated water retention.
So that pre-race weight gain isn't necessarily fat?
Not at all. A couple of pounds gained during carb loading is expected and actually indicates the strategy is working. You're storing more fuel and hydration. However, the exact ratio of water to glycogen is probably more complex and can be influenced by factors like overall fluid intake and electrolyte balance. But the basic principle holds: glycogen storage pulls water into the muscles.
Good to know. Okay, this has been so helpful in understanding the role of carbs in fuel and performance. Now let's shift gears and bust some of the common myths out there about carbohydrates. There are just so many.
Absolutely. It's definitely time to clear up some of the biggest misconceptions that circulate. Where should we start?
Let's hit the big one first. Carbs make you fat. I hear this constantly. People are terrified of bread and pasta.
Right. This is probably the most pervasive myth, but it's a huge oversimplification and not entirely accurate.
So carbs themselves aren't the direct culprit for weight gain?
Not inherently, no. Weight gain fundamentally happens when you consistently consume more calories than your body burns over time. It's about energy balance.
Calories in versus calories out.
Exactly. Those excess calories can come from carbohydrates, yes, but they can also come from fats or proteins. Numerous studies have actually shown that people can lose weight effectively on various types of reduced calorie diets, regardless of whether they emphasize lower carbs, lower fats, or a balance.
As long as there's a calorie deficit overall.
Precisely. Eating moderate amounts of carbohydrates, especially minimally processed, fiber-rich ones like fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, as part of a balanced diet that also includes healthy fats and adequate protein, does not automatically program your body for excessive weight gain.
So it's more about the total calories and the overall quality of the diet, not just demonizing one macronutrient.
That's a much more accurate way to look at it. focusing on portion sizes, overall calorie intake, nutrient balance, and choosing whole foods over highly processed options packed with added sugars and unhealthy fats is key.
Okay, myth busted. What about this one? Low-carb diets are just a fad. You hear people dismiss them as temporary trends.
Well, while low-carb diets have certainly seen surges in popularity at different times, calling them just a fad isn't really fair or accurate.
Why not?
Because low-carbohydrate eating patterns actually have a pretty long history, going back way before the recent keto craze. And more importantly, there's now a substantial body of scientific research investigating their effects on weight loss, metabolic health markers like blood sugar and triglycerides, and managing conditions like type 2 diabetes and epilepsy.
So there's actual science behind them.
Yes, there's considerable research. Like any dietary approach, they have potential benefits and drawbacks, and they aren't necessarily the best fit for everyone, but they are a legitimate dietary strategy with scientific backing, not just a fleeting trend.
Okay. Related to that, what about the idea that the initial weight loss you see on a low-carb diet is just water weight?
Yes, the water weight argument. There's partial truth here, but it's often used dismissively.
So what's the real story?
It's absolutely true that when you significantly cut back on carbohydrates, your body starts using up its stored glycogen. And as we just discussed, glycogen holds onto water.
Right, the 1.3 ratio roughly.
Yeah, so as glycogen stores deplete in those first few days or week, you do lose a noticeable amount of water weight, which can be encouraging on the scale.
But it's not only water.
No, not at all. If someone continues to follow a well-formulated low-carb diet that puts them in a calorie deficit, their body will start burning stored body fat for energy. So sustained low-carb dieting definitely can, and often does, lead to significant and meaningful fat loss, not just temporary water loss.
Good clarification. Now here's a scarier one I've heard. Low-carb diets cause dangerous ketoacidosis. People sometimes confuse ketosis with ketoacidosis.
This is a really critical distinction to make, and the confusion can be genuinely harmful. They are absolutely not the same thing.
Okay, explain the difference.
Nutritional ketosis is a normal, safe metabolic state that can occur when you follow a very low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet. Your body adapts to primarily using fat for fuel, and as a byproduct, it produces ketone bodies. Blood ketone levels rise, but they stay within a physiologically controlled range, and your blood pH remains normal.
So ketosis itself isn't dangerous for most people.
For generally healthy individuals without certain underlying conditions, nutritional ketosis is typically safe. Diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA, on the other hand, is a life-threatening medical emergency.
And who does DKA affect?
It primarily occurs in people with type 1 diabetes and sometimes type 2 when there's a severe lack of insulin. Without insulin, blood sugar levels skyrocket uncontrollably, and ketone production goes into overdrive, reaching extremely high, dangerous levels. This combination makes the blood dangerously acidic.
So very high blood sugar, PIUS, very high ketones, PIUS, acidic blood.
Exactly. It's a pathological state driven by insulin deficiency, completely different from the controlled physiological state of nutritional ketosis achieved through diet in someone with normal insulin function. Conflating the two is a serious misunderstanding.
Okay, very important distinction. Thanks. What about this piece of advice? Avoid all white foods because they're unhealthy.
The no white foods rule. It's another oversimplification that misses the mark.
Why? What's wrong with it?
Well, the intention behind it is usually sound, trying to encourage people to eat fewer refined grains like white bread, white pasta, white rice, and limit added sugars, which are often white. These can be less nutritious and higher glycemic than their whole grain counterparts.
But not all white foods are bad.
Absolutely not. Think about it. Cauliflower is white, onions are white, garlic, mushrooms, parsnips, potatoes, even things like white beans and chicken breast. These are all incredibly nutritious foods packed with vitamins, minerals, and sometimes fiber.
So the color itself is meaningless?
Pretty much. The focus should be on choosing whole, unprocessed, or minimally processed foods over highly refined ones and limiting added sugars, regardless of their color. Judging a food solely by its whiteness is just poor nutritional advice.
Good point. Okay, last myth for now. Carbohydrates are inherently addictive. You hear people talk about sugar addiction or carb addiction.
This is a controversial and complex topic. While certain highly palatable foods, often those high in both sugar and fat, can trigger reward pathways in the brain similar to addictive substances. Calling carbohydrates themselves addictive in the same way as drugs is debated among scientists.
So it's not a clear-cut addiction.
It's likely more nuanced. Often, the intense cravings and feelings of being addicted to carbs that people report are strongly linked to patterns of restrictive dieting.
How so?
When you try to completely forbid or severely restrict certain foods or entire food groups, it can psychologically increase their appeal and lead to preoccupation, intense cravings, and then potentially cycles of restriction followed by overeating or binging, which can feel like addiction.
The forbidden fruit effect.
Sort of, yeah. A more balanced, less restrictive approach that allows for moderation and includes a variety of foods is often more sustainable and less likely to foster those intense, uncontrollable cravings or feelings of addiction towards specific macronutrients like carbohydrates. It's more about the relationship with food and eating patterns.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, busting those myths is really helpful. So putting it all together, the science, the performance aspects, the myths, what's the big takeaway for individuals trying to figure out their own carbohydrate intake? Is there a magic number or percentage we should all aim for?
If only it were that simple.
Yep.
But no, there's definitely no single one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to how many carbohydrates someone should eat.
Why such variability?
Because the optimal amount really depends heavily on a whole host of individual factors. Your energy needs are primary. How active are you? What's your age, sex, body size? Your overall metabolic health plays a huge role too.
And personal goals, I imagine.
Absolutely. Are you trying to lose weight, gain muscle, fuel marathon training, manage diabetes? Each of these goals might suggest a different carbohydrate strategy.
What about just how someone feels eating more or fewer carbs?
That's important too. Individual physiological responses can vary. Some people feel great and have stable energy on a higher carb diet, while others might find they do better with fewer carbs, perhaps due to differences in insulin sensitivity or other metabolic factors. Listening to your own body is key.
So lots of individual factors, but are there any general recommendations or guidelines that can serve as a starting point?
There are broad guidelines. For example, the Dietary Reference Index suggests that generally adults should get around 45% to 65% of their total daily calories from carbohydrates.
45 to 65%, that's quite a wide range.
It is, and it reflects that variability. But importantly, within that range, the emphasis should always be on the quality of the carbohydrates.
Prioritizing the good stuff.
Exactly. Focus on getting your carbs primarily from whole, minimally processed, fiber-rich sources. We're talking fruits, vegetables, legumes like beans and lentils and whole grains. Minimize the refined grains, sugary drinks, and processed snacks full of added sugars.
Quality over quantity, or at least quality first.
Quality is paramount, yes. Then you can adjust the quantity within that range based on your specific needs.
And athletes are a special case.
Definitely. As we discussed, athletes, particularly endurance athletes or those in high-volume training, generally have significantly higher carbohydrate needs to fuel performance and recovery. Their intake might be at the higher end of that range or even exceed it, and timing becomes much more critical.
What about people with health conditions like type 2 diabetes?
That's another crucial consideration. For individuals managing type 2 diabetes, carefully monitoring carbohydrate intake, both the amount and the type, paying attention to GI and GL is essential for good blood sugar management. Working closely with healthcare professionals like a doctor or a registered dietitian is really important for them to personalize their plan.
So personalize based on activity, goals, health status, and individual response, while always prioritizing quality.
That sums it up nicely. It's about finding the right balance for you.
Before we wrap up, you mentioned glycogen storage diseases very briefly earlier when talking about glycogen. Can you just touch on those again? What are they?
Sure, it's a complex area, but basically, glycogen storage diseases, or GSDs, are a group of relatively rare inherited genetic disorders.
Genetic, okay.
Yeah, they're caused by mutations in genes that code for the enzymes or proteins involved in either building glycogen or breaking it down.
So problems with storing or using stored glucose.
Exactly. Depending on the specific enzyme affected, it can lead to either an abnormal buildup of glycogen in certain tissues, like the liver or muscles, because it can't be broken down properly, or the body might not be able to access the stored glucose from glycogen when it needs energy, leading to problems like low blood sugar.
Are there different types?
Yes, there are numerous types, often named after the researchers who first described them or by the deficient enzyme. You might hear names like von Gierke disease, GSD type 1, Cori disease, GSD type 3, or Pompe disease, GSD type 2, among others. Each affects different enzymes and pathways and has distinct symptoms and severity.
How are they diagnosed and managed?
Diagnosis can involve genetic testing to identify the specific mutation, measuring enzyme activity in blood cells or tissue samples, like from a muscle biopsy. Management is really specific to the type of GSD, but often focuses on maintaining normal blood sugar levels, normal glycemia.
How do they do that?
For some types, like GSDE, ungierki, it often involves very frequent feedings, sometimes including uncooked cornstarch, which releases glucose slowly to prevent blood sugar from dropping too low, especially overnight. Dietary restrictions might also be needed, like limiting simple sugars such as fructose and sucrose, which can worsen problems in some GSDs. It requires careful, lifelong management with a specialized medical team.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for that brief overview. It highlights how crucial proper carbohydrate metabolism is.
It really does. These rare conditions underscore the complexity and importance of the pathways we've been discussing.
Definitely. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the often confusing world of carbohydrates. To wrap things up, what are the absolute key messages you'd want our listeners, the learners, to take away from our conversation today?
I think the main thing to remember is that carbohydrates aren't inherently good or bad. They're not the villain or the savior.
It's more nuanced.
Much more nuanced.
Yeah.
Their impact on your health, your energy, your performance really depends on the type of carbohydrate you're choosing, the quantity you're eating in relation to your needs, the timing of when you eat them, especially around activity, and of course your own individual context, your health, your goals, your activity level.
So prioritize quality first.
Absolutely. Focus on getting the majority of your carbs from whole, minimally processed, fiber-rich plant foods. That's probably the single most important takeaway for general health.
And then adjust the quantity.
Adjust the quantity based on your energy demands. More active people generally need more carbs. Sedentary people likely need less.
And timing for athletes.
Strategic timing around exercise can definitely be a performance enhancer, particularly for endurance. And let's not forget fiber.
The unsung hero.
Definitely. Remember the crucial role that adequate dietary fiber plays not just for digestion, but for overall metabolic health, gut health, and long-term well-being. Don't neglect fiber.
Great summary. Quality, quantity based on needs, strategic timing if active, and plenty of fiber.
I covered the essentials.
Okay, and finally, as always, a provocative thought to leave our listeners with. Instead of thinking of carbs in simple terms like friend or foe, maybe ask yourself, how can you become more strategic? How can you leverage carbohydrates intelligently to fuel your unique energy needs, support your workouts, and contribute to your long-term health goals?
Yeah, moving beyond fear or confusion to informed strategy.
Exactly. Take some time to consider the nuances we've discussed today, the types, the timing, the fiber, your own body, and move past those simplistic good versus bad labels. Understanding yourself and your activity levels is really the next step in creating a carbohydrate intake plan that truly works for you, not against you.
Well said.
Thanks so much for breaking all that down for us. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this deep dive.